Hi everyone, David Aragona and Greg Milkowski here taking a look at one of two Grade 1 races on Saturday at Parx. This one's for the fillies. It's the Grade 1 Cotillion for the 3-year-old fillies going a mile and a 16th on the main track. And Craig, kind of like with the Pennsylvania Derby that's lacking the presence of epicenter, there's no nest in this Grade 1 Cotillion, but that makes for a much more competitive race as they throw up this field of 9 runners. Pretty wide open affair.
I found this race really interesting. I like the Pennsylvania Derby as a betting race, and I really like this one as well. We have Secret Oath, who was able to win the Kentucky Oaks. We have some other horses that have made a name for themselves, but we also have some up-and-coming fillies that have kind of just jumped into the scene and look pretty dangerous in this spot.
Yeah, Secret Oath is definitely the filly with name recognition in this race. That's probably some of the reason why she's listed at 2-1 on the morning line. But you can make a case for a lot of runners in this field, some up-and-comers who seem to be improving at the right time. We're going to get into all of them in just a bit. But before we discuss the individual contenders, let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector for this Cotillion. It's going to be interesting to see how these top two sort themselves out on the front end, Craig, because both the number 2 Adair Manor and the number 9 Society have plenty of early speed.
They do, and I'm with the pace projector on this one. It is kind of hard to separate them, and given the gap they have over the third horses, I'm not sure that these two can't just clear off like the pace projector shows and just kind of set a moderate pace up front. So that's what I was kind of looking at as I went through this race. I would be surprised if things got really hot. It would be kind of silly for these two to throw it down, and I didn't see a ton of early speed in the others, perhaps the one Green Up. But that filly seems like one that's positioned perfectly by the pace projector to me. It seems like that's exactly the kind of position that Irad Ortiz would love in this spot.
Let's talk about that Kentucky Oaks winner, Secret Oath, and we'll begin with her last race, the Grade 1 Alabama. Of course, she and everybody else were beaten pretty decisively by Nest, who was much the best this day. Craig, I thought that Secret Oath ran on gamely to be second here, going the 1.25 mile distance, which might be a little bit far for her. She did finish ahead of 2 other contenders that are also in this race, Goddess of Fire and Gerrymander. I think you just have to wonder with Secret Oath, is this aggressive schedule going to eventually catch up with her?
That's what I was wondering as well, because when you look at her speed figures, like we're going to do here in just a second, they're not really progressing at all like you would normally want to see from a 3-year-old. They generally get faster as we move through the season, and she just kind of keeps churning out those 115 type speed figures. So I'm not as excited about her as I was earlier in the year. She's a filly who has been running all year. She's run several races, more than many in this field. And it just seems like to me at a short price that she's one I'd be very leery of taking a big stand on to betting on her.
Yeah, and I know the margin was just 4.25 lengths last time. When you watch that race, it felt like Nest was geared down for the final 16th of a mile. I think she was more superior than that margin would indicate. And like you said, Secret Oath just hasn't really moved forward at all. Arguably, in her performances, has not improved nearly at the rate of some of her contemporaries, Nest in particular, who has obviously moved forward since that Kentucky Oaks. So just a little bit concerned that some others are catching up to and surpassing Secret Oath this late in the season. And like we talked about with the pace projector, it's not like there's that much speed signed on here to make the race fall apart for her. As for Goddess of Fire, who was third in that Alabama, she ran pretty well that day. I think that's the best that we've seen from her so far, Craig, but it does feel like she's going to have to take another step forward to win a race like this.
Right. She has progressed in the right direction. I remember I've actually seen her twice in person. I was at the Gulfstream Oaks, and I wasn't really impressed with her that day. She didn't run very well in Kentucky, but since that time, she has moved forward. I'm not really sure what happened to her last time in the Alabama, where I was actually out on the apron that day. It seemed like she was closer to me than she was to the inside rail, but she still would have some lengths to make up. She also seems to be one doesn't have a whole lot of early speed, so she would need some pace as well. Of the two, I would probably prefer her a little bit to Secret Oath because I think she is moving in the right direction, where the others stagnant or moving in the other direction, but I do prefer some others in here.
Now, the horse who did not run well in the Alabama was the number 5 Gerrymander. She finished fifth, 11 lengths behind Nest, about 7 lengths behind Secret Oath in second. Maybe the mile and a quarter distance just didn't agree with her last time. I also think it was somewhat surprising to see her behind Nest in the early going of that race. I think people would have expected her to get a more aggressive ride than she got. If she were to run back to her Mother Goose 2-back when she finished ahead of another horse she's facing today, Shahama, I think she'd have a chance, but she's another one that does need to take that step forward.
Right. She hasn't run quite as fast as some others in here. I do prefer Mother Goose to the Alabama. I didn't like the strategy Flavien Prat used that day. So I put a line through that race personally. But as you say, as good as their Mother Goose looked, it's still a little ways to go to catch up with some others in here.
Probably the biggest wild card in this cotillion is the number 2, Adair Manor. Let's take a look at her the last time that she was in action at Pimlico back in May for the Grade 2 Black-Eyed Susan. She was bet down to be the 2-1 favorite this day, Craig, and somewhat disappointing in defeat to be second to Interstate Daydream, a horse who has really improved, Brad Coxwater, who was in great form at this time of the year. But Adair Manor, she kind of came off the bridle a bit early on the far turn, had to be ridden pretty hard by John Velasquez, just looked like she was spinning her wheels through the stretch. She's been off since then. She's cycled through a couple of barns during the Bob Baffert suspension, but now she's back with Bob Baffert and seems to be training well into this cotillion.
She was a filly who looked like the leader of the division earlier in the year when she had a couple of romps at Santa Anita, winning by a total of 25 lengths. But things didn't go well. She obviously wasn't able to run in the Kentucky Oaks after getting narrowly beaten in the Santa Anita Oaks. Didn't really like that Black-Eyed Susan, but I'm not going to I'm kind of taking it with a grain of salt because she did lay off after that race. So I'm going to say maybe something just didn't go right for her, maybe something physically. And now she's back in the Bob Baffert barn. I'm not sure what that means, but she is definitely a wild card in my eyes.
Yeah, I really do like the way she's training coming into this race. Just seems to be full of herself in the mornings. She's a horse that has always trained well, but it does seem like she's doing well heading into this spot. But Craig, I know you wanted to highlight a Bob Baffert DRF Formulator statistic because his horses have been taking a lot of money since his suspension ended, especially some of the older horses, and maybe not winning at as high a rate as people would have assumed.
Right. A lot of his horses, the races he has been winning have come with his 2-year-olds, and he's won a ton, a lot of first-time starters, a lot of the stakes races at Del Mar. But when you look at the horses that he's getting back into his barn, either if they were with Tim Yakteen or Sean McCarthy, or in this case, both, they haven't done quite as well. They're getting bet off the board. It's not like they're terrible. They've won 4 out of 17 starts. But as you can see by that ROI, they just are not paying anything when they win. I actually looked at all 17 of the starters in that sample size, and I don't think there was one above 3-1. So this horse will likely get bet like the others, and I'm going to look in a little different direction. It won't shock me if she wins, but I'm just not willing to take a short price on her.
Yeah, one of the great things about DRF Formulator is you can really drill down some specific statistics for a trainer with a lot of runners like Bob Baffert. And since his suspension ended, I believe in early July, I think he has a positive ROI with his 2-year-olds. And with all runners that are 3 and up, the ROI is significantly negative. So kind of in line with that very specific stat that Craig just referenced. Let's take a look at a horse who is improving quickly coming into this cotillion, and that's the number 1 Green Up. And we'll check out her last race when she won the Catherine Sophia, the local prep for this at Parx. You know, Craig, this filly has not been mentioned as among the elite 3-year-old fillies in this division, but this performance from a speed figure standpoint certainly puts her in the conversation.
This is a race I actually wish I would have looked at the buyer speed figures because it was a really tricky day, and I'm curious what they did. Maybe you can enlighten me when I'm done here. But it was a race the Smarty Jones, the 3-year-old prep for the Pennsylvania Derby, was run right after, and the times just compared made no sense. So this race was kind of rated in isolation, only using the horses in it. And when I say that, this race was the much, much faster race. Had I tried to rate those 2 races together, this is one which would have been even faster than the 121. The Smarty Jones would have had a significantly lower speed figure, and it just didn't make any sense. So it was the way I had to go. It was a track that was drying out throughout the day. I'm sure they were working on it a bit, but when you look through the Timeform US chart and see the horses in it, it makes a lot of sense. And I think she's certainly a dangerous filly in here. She's moving in the right direction. She had a huge jump last time. My one concern is I'm not a huge bounce guy, but that is just such a big jump. You wonder if maybe it'll take a little something out of her.
Well, Andy Beyer pretty much agrees with you, Craig, because he also had this filly improving significantly in her last start. That race got a 100 Beyer speed figure, pretty much in line with the 121 Timeform US number that you gave her. Her race 2 back, I will say, did kind of preview the performance that was forthcoming in that Catherine Sophia. I know that we didn't give much of a speed figure to that Boiling Springs, but when I went back and watched that race, she was so much better than that field. It was almost laughable. I mean, I know the margin was just under 6 lengths. It felt like she could have won by 10 or 12 if Paco Lopez wanted to. She was just really full of herself that day and seems like a filly that's just doing really well right now. Still might be flying somewhat under the radar, even with Todd Pletcher and Irad Ortiz in her corner. So definitely an interesting contender in this cotillion. We should also briefly talk about Morning Matcha, who finished 3rd behind Greenup in that Catherine Sophia last time. She would really need this pace to come apart, Greg, because she just hasn't run quite as fast as some others in here.
Right. I just figured we should probably mention her since we've shown her in 2 different replays, the Pimlico race and the Parx race. And she is a horse who's going to be making up ground late, but she's also going to have to make up some points in the speed figure department. She would certainly need a hot piece to be a contender in this field.
Well, we've already talked about 2 Todd Pletcher runners. Let's take a look at the 3rd of his trio. That is Shahama and her victory in the Monmouth Oaks last time out as she was prepping for this cotillion. Not quite as impressive as that performance we just watched from Greenup, but she was best in this race over a filly, Juju's Map, who hasn't quite turned out to be the kind of horse that we thought she could be as a 3-year-old. It's a big step up in class for Shahama, Craig, and she's going to have to turn the tables on some horses that beat her earlier in the season.
Right. Similar to Greenup, I do wonder how much her speed figure was held back. I'm talking of Greenup's race 2 back. You can see in her past performances how slow the pace was last time she sat there. She really finished off the race to a final time 1:16, but she's one I have real questions. The one time she's faced a strong pace was in the Oaks, and she wasn't able to keep up early. And she seems to be a filly who does her best running when she's up close. So I do think there's some quality speed in here, and I think she might be in just a little bit over her head.
Let's round out our discussion of the contenders with the number 9 Society, and we'll take a look at her last race at Charlestown, the Grade 3 Charlestown Oaks, going the 7 furlongs around 2 turns. And Craig, kind of another situation similar to Greenup, taking a huge step forward from a speed figure standpoint, though it's going to be a little bit tougher for her to replicate this performance over the unique Charlestown configuration at Parx going a longer distance.
Well, it just so happens I was actually there for her race at Charlestown as well, and I really liked what I saw from her that day. I had thought that her race in the Coaching Club of America Oaks was obviously stronger than it looked, just because she was actually dueling with Nest, and not just dueling with Nest, who's obviously the leader of the division, but doing so in really fast fractions. You can see we have them all coded in red in the Timeform US PPs, and I just think she's a filly who I don't want to dismiss her as a horse who can't get the distance. She obviously won a small stakes at Churchill going the mile on the 16th, but maybe people might want to just think she can't handle it because of that Oaks, and she turned back to a sprint and run well. But I think she's a horse that's really moving in the right direction, and I find her to be a really dangerous contender, particularly given the pace situation, where if she can handle Adair Manor, she's going to open up on the field, and they're going to have her to catch, I think, in the stretch.
And Craig, I know we talked about her flashy speed figure last time on our Timeform US Pacecast. That's a race that really does stand up to scrutiny because there were plenty of other 7 furlong races on that Charlestown card to compare it to. She just ran a very fast race that day. And what I'll add about her coaching club, American Oaks 2 back, is that she completely blew the start that day, stumbled so badly coming out of the starting gate, was behind the other horses in the race early, and had to rush up past them to set that fast pace, or at least contest that fast pace. So that was a much better performance than it appears on paper. It's just a question of whether she's actually improved as much as that 7 furlong performance last time indicates, and if she can duplicate it going the mile and the 16th distance. Let's throw up our picks for this race. And obviously, Craig's answer to that question is yes, because he put Society on top.
Yeah, this is another race where I don't want to take a short price. I know one of our other videos, the Pennsylvania Derby, I said the same thing. And I particularly do not want to play Secret Oath in here. I think she may be over the top a bit. There's several others in here that have better speed figures, and they include both Society and Green Up. So they're ones I'm going to be playing in exactas, and maybe even both to win, but definitely Society, one I need to monitor the tote board. But I do think there is some value to be had in here if you don't like Secret Oath like I don't.
Yeah, Society is a very interesting horse in this race. They definitely considered her. It's going to be a tough road to hoe, but I think she's going to be a fair price, Craig, so can't blame you for taking a shot with her. I did go to that improving horse drawn down towards the rail, the number 1 Green Up, have just been really taken with her last couple of replays. It seems like she's doing so well right now, and she could fly under the radar a little bit. I know that she's got that flashy speed figure from last time that's going to attract some money her way with Irad Ortiz and Todd Pletcher in her corner, but don't think she's going to be favored over Secret Oath. I think she's going to be probably the second or third choice in this race. So she's my top pick. Like Craig, I'm somewhat against Secret Oath. I'm afraid of that Bob Baffert runner, Adair Manor, but ultimately could not put her higher in my picks because it does feel like his runners often do take quite a bit of money. So that's a look at the Grade 1 Cotillion on Saturday at Parx. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.